Thank you very much, Guadalupe, and to all the speakers. May I invite you to sit in front for the open forum? Okay, we now open the floor for questions, comments, observations. Yes, sir. Kindly approach the microphone so our Zoom participants can hear you. Okay, so I'll just ask the others to line up. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Antonia Boitis. This question is for Guadalupe. Thank you for a fascinating new perspective on Batanes. I was made to understand that Urdaneta had discovered the route back to Mexico through the north of Luzon, and that had been used by the galleons ever since. That doesn't seem to be the case. Okay.
No.
So they stopped using the northern passage and shifted back to the San Bernardino.
He never used that area.
But the galleons never used that?
No.
Okay.
No, because the route was through the Strait of San Bernardino. And in fact, the merchants refuse change that route because they have a lot of interest, a lot of smuggling activities there. So the change of this route was a result of Bourbon projects, the first Bourbon proposals from the beginning of the century, but only occur in the second part of the century.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's news to me. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for Juan and for Eberhard, if you don't mind. So for Juan, I was wondering, have you published any of this work? Because this would be excellent to teach. I've tried to explain how silver flows work to undergraduates, and it's just not there, but I really liked how you presented it. And also I had a question thinking comparatively, because that's just my thing. I've thought a lot about the Dutch VOC aspect of silver flows, and I was wondering if you talk about that at all in your PhD work, in your research. I'm thinking particularly about the story about the shift of capital from Antwerp to Amsterdam, and how that kind of plays into your story. Is it impacted at all, financial capital flows by the occupation? For Eberhard, I was wondering what you were talking about with Dalrymple and Sulu reminded me a lot of James Brooke a century later. So I'm wondering if you have, if you've looked at any of the James Brooke sources and see if he talks about Dalrymple and takes any lessons away or doesn't. Because a lot of the kind of failures really reminded me kind of what James Brooke is doing with his different treaties, and also thinking about how with the Sulus, how in Sulu they also, they have agency, right, in all of these things, trying to pin the British against, the Spanish as they're being encroached on by both. So, yeah.
But for me, it's very easy to answer no. I have not looked so far into the 19th century, but it is a very interesting idea. So thank you for bringing it up. So maybe in the future, it would be nice to compare that. Thank you.
So, hi, thank you so much for your questions. So, like the first one, I can also answer very quickly. No, sadly, I haven't published yet. There's supposed to be a chapter forthcoming in a Spanish publication, Seville, which we're negotiating. With a co-edited book, but other than that, I'm afraid not. Hopefully in the near future, though. And your second question is very interesting. So have I, like to look at it comparatively, have I looked at the Dutch VOC, right? Well, the Dutch VOC is a very interesting case. So the switch from Antwerp to Amsterdam, that's important for them, but doesn't really show up that much here, right? What is very interesting about the East India companies compared to the Manila trade is how the East India companies, both the English and the Dutch, acquire their capital. And in here, the English have, and the English and the Dutch have two different ways. Both the English and the Dutch get it from the open money market in Europe, which is re-exports from America that first go to Spain, and therefore it's more expensive because they go through mints. The whole monetary system of Europe in the early modern period is extremely fragmented, and they have to buy in the open market. So they always try to avoid that. But in here, the Dutch have a difference compared to the English, which is the Dutch control the access to Japan. And Japan, for most of the 17th century, for the first half of the 17th century, is the main provider of silver. One thing that happens, though, is that the Japanese silver mines are not as big as the American ones, and they don't last as long. So by the end of the 17th century, they disappear. So what you see is that both the English and the Dutch try to acquire silver within Asia. The Japanese managed to get the Portuguese kicked out of Japan. They put themselves there. That eventually peters out. But what the English do is that they are the ones that manage to lodge themselves in Manila. And in fact, one of the things that the English do when they conquer Manila is that they take the agent of the Dutch in Manila and they send him in chains to Ceylon. They're like, okay, competition out. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, but it highlights the importance of the silver routes for both the companies. Yeah, thank you.
Next question.
Hi again, I'm Nicholas from UP Diliman. My question's directed at Juan. It's nice to see you again after the pandemic. Yeah, last time we saw each other was in Avila. Yeah. I really liked what you've done with the Obras Pias, and I liked your very concise statement that Manila was a clearinghouse and not just a hub. I was wondering, how might the indigenous have been woven into the fabric of the narrative that you've described?
Thank you. That is good to see you again too. And that is an excellent question. So the Obras Pias, they're mostly opened by Spanish citizens, by Peninsulares. The membership of these confraternities and brotherhoods that manage the money, from traces we have from the Dominican archives, we know that at some point they start collecting the race of the woman. I don't know why. And we see that half are Spanish, around half are Spanish or Creole, and the other half are mestizos. In principle, it does look like the natives don't participate that much in the whole system. The importance of this is extremely limited to Manila. It's extremely urban. There seems to be a disconnect. In the notarial protocols, we do see sometimes, however, that there is sea loans that sometimes are given out to principales. It's impossible to track exactly, for me, it's impossible to track exactly why that is happening. I have one case in my head. Tomás Dendaya gives a sea loan to a woman called Manuela Rosa de Pacines, who is the principal of La Ermita, to be sent to Acapulco, and nothing else appears there. But what is important, though, is this whole system of Manila is extremely disconnected from everything else that is going, or it seems to me that is very disconnected from everything else that is going on in the Philippines. And Luis Alonso Alvarez also has the theory that this is one of the reasons why the Spanish are not engaging, like why the Philippines lack all plantations and all of this, because it seems like these Obras Pias are kind of crowding out all investment, siphoning off all available capital into the trade. And so, yes, it's an excellent question because it highlights this massive disconnect that there is between the capital markets of Manila and what is supposed to be the productive economy in the interior, which is more left to the haciendas, and a lot of it to the sanglays as well. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks to all the presenters. This was a very rich panel, actually, and I've learned a lot. My question is for Ebu. I was wondering about, very quickly, about the position of the Maranao and Maguindanao during that time, because you mentioned that they were still conducting raids. So, and I know a lot of the products actually were going to Jolo from Cotabato area, basically. So were they supporting the Zulu Sultanate in that sense, within the strategic positionalities within the Spanish and the English, or what was their position basically in this dispute?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good point. I was focusing on the relation between Zulu and British and Spanish, as I did not enough material for the Mindanao, Maguindanao to include them in the topic, but I think they would be very worthwhile to entertain that thought. So regarding to alliances, I think I've mentioned at one point they were allied with the Zulu, but some years later they were loosely allied, I said, with the Spaniards. So they were shifting alliances in that moment. At some point, the Spaniards were very involved in the internal politics of Maguindanao. So they were having something like a puppet sultan there for some time, which did not work out in the end, but for some time they had this support in Maguindanao. So that was one phase, and politically it was an on-off depending on many factors, as the political system of the Zulu, I think I mentioned, in Maguindanao is even more complicated. There's many more different, let's say, head of regions that you have there. So it's much more complicated for the Spaniards to be in contact with that region. On an economical level, I think that's also very interesting, especially maybe focusing on the last moment. After the fall of Balambangan, there were intense relations between Zulu and Maguindanao, as you mentioned. And of course, also, as I mentioned, between Balambangan and Mindanao as well, because the English managed to establish themselves there, and they fail in various regards. So they can't establish themselves in this and this and this regard. With China, it doesn't really work out. With Manila, they can't do commerce because it doesn't really not legal commerce. So they focus on a nice commerce with the pepper from Brunei, and also they have this line of commerce with Mindanao. So these are the two lines they have there. Once they're gone, this line is missing. And apparently, and that's also according to James Warren's information here, that the British leave the way open for the Zulu to jump in there. And so apparently the Zulu and the Tausug become the strong intermediaries of all the commerce to Maguindanao. So apparently not only the boot, but also the booty that they make there in Balambangan enables the Zulu to really take a very strong position in the region and be much more dominant than the Maguindanao during this area on a political and also on a commercial level. So that's then the phase after the 1775 area. So that's a little bit in this direction. Thank you.
I agree. This was a great panel. Thank you very much. My question is for Juan. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the impact of the occupation. I think you gave us a very texture sense of what's going on in Manila and that part of the Pacific. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening across the lake in the how this had an impact in the areas that provided the demand? So that will be, I'm guessing it's still coming from Potosi, still coming from parts of Mexico. But what was the economic impact there?
So again, thank you very much for the question. This is a very interesting question that I don't know that much about. One would like to say that since these are the counter side of this whole trade is not just obviously Asian demand for specie, it's a Spanish-American consumption for textiles and goods. I'm not exactly sure. So the mining in Potosi, in New Spain, the mines are never supposed to have deactivated. And the way that the internal economy of New Spain in the whole trade is a structure, is because it is fragmented. There's these wholesalers that are the connection between the mines, the mint, and the fairs where all the textiles arrive, both from the Pacific and the Atlantic. I'm not exactly sure, but in principle, based on their business model, these people could sit and wait. 1762, however, is very interesting because usually if something bad happens in the Pacific, this is a supply of consumption goods that ultimately, if need be, can be substituted with imports from the Atlantic, which is also bringing mostly textiles and also some, they also bring other consumption goods. But the funny thing about 1762 is that both the Pacific and the Atlantic supply routes are interrupted because they take both Manila and Cuba and Santiago. That is a great question that I haven't thought about. My initial theory, my initial thought would be that the mining activity would necessarily need to cease per se. But of course, the exchange activity probably would have suffered, if not necessarily a collapse, but definitely delays, I'm guessing. So yeah, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is for Senior Juan, and it has something to do with the massive corruption among of course, the Castellanos, the Cavite, especially in that time frame of around 1650 to 1700, which simply means, did this condition have an effect on the liquidity of the obras pias? So when the British came, there was exactly nothing of the obras pias, since there were many articles like the one by Alba, I think, on massive corruption, no? Between on the galleon trade.
Okay, so thank you. So the question is if there is massive corruption in the obras pias, right? Yes. In principle, no, because these obras pias, very often they are, again, managed by laymen and laywomen, and it's difficult for the states to, it's not just difficult for the state to monitor, but they are essentially managing their own funds, right? Many of the people that are in the confraternities and in the brotherhoods are also people that open funds. They also lend to one another. All of the deals that are done in sea loans also have to be recorded with a singrafa, with the notary's signature. So therefore, they appear in the public access office of the notary. He has all the records, and we can see as well that there is some evidence that the beneficiaries of the obras pias knew how much. So for example, if an obra pia was supposed to give money to a hospital, to the Hospital de San Juan, the Hospital de San Juan was in contact with the tertiary order, whatever, that managed this fund, and they could monitor one another. At the obra pia level, there really isn't that much of an incentive for people to embezzle, because it is like their communal money pot, right? As long as the obra pia goes well, they have plenty of money to take at an interest, but they can always access the Acapulco negotiation. There is, however, a lot of stuff written on corruption. There's two reasons for this. The first reason is that the Philippines were taken over from Spain. The Philippines were straight up taken over by the Americans. And a lot of the things that they saw didn't match up, but also there was a bit of a vested interest in trying to make the Spanish administration not look good, right? So Schurz, for example, who is the father of the study of the Philippines in the US, he wasn't a historian, he was a colonial officer. And many of the things that they saw that was corruption, in fact, wasn't. So for example, one classic example is that all of these obras pias very often invested in Java. They paid for the trade in Java, and that was illegal, technically. However, at some point, they're sending the records to the King of Spain. They're sending the audits, and you can see very well there that they are investing in Java, and they go to the king and they say, hey, we're investing in Java, and the King of Spain is like, yeah, cool. So at that point, is that really corruption, or is this? So there is a bit of a vested interest, and as well, there's the ambiguity of the Spanish law. It's like, you're not allowed to do this, but here I'm the king, and it's like, okay, yeah, go ahead. There are some cases in which there's trials in which members of the Misericordia are standing as both the criminals and the victims. It's a very complicated question. It's a really good question. So there definitely was some level of corruption. It's impossible to know for certain, but it's also true that it was not as big as it's made to seem, at least not on the obra pia level. Yeah, thanks.
Would you like to ask a question? Okay, well, with that, we would like to thank the members of this panel for their presentation, and thank you to the audience for your questions. And let's give them a round of applause. And we have come to the end of the panel presentations. We will now take a break and come back at 5:30 for the screening of Sally Gutierrez's documentary and the reading of Rogelio Braga's Elephant and Castle.
Before we go, Ino has donated to this book, which he wants to give away. If you can answer the question. This is the quiz. Okay, so just raise your hand if you know it, and then you get the book. Okay, so wait. Those who already have the book. Okay. Disqualified. So raise your hand. So who was the librarian of the San Agustin during the British invasion of Manila? You don't have the book, Christy? Oh, complete name. Yeah, I think so. Okay, correct. Please come and get your prize. Maria. Thank you, Ino, for the book.